So here's the subject then for you for the Wednesday Bike Club. 125 motorbikes. Oh, how it's changed. And it's an interesting world, isn't it, the 125 market, because when you think how quickly these bikes get changed, they change hands. Because when you think of, you do your CBT, you know, you get your 125, you do your thing. You've got two groups, haven't you, really, doing riding 125s. You've got the new riders that want to go straight from the start and then get their mod 1, mod 2, whatever it is, their big bike license and go on. So they'll be grabbing 125s, doing what they need to do, their CBT, and then the bikes get sold on really quickly. So you have this incredibly quite fast moving 125 bike market, didn't you? Because I think there's probably more new riders coming than there are old riders, and I need to qualify that statement, because you'll get people that come into riding motorbikes at later in life, you know, they're in their sort of 40s, 50s, that want to sort of relive a moment, and then they may go to a 125 and buy a bike in that situation, and sometimes they'll keep hold of that. So they don't tend to sell those on. They stay with the smaller bike because they can, you know, they can ride it on their car license. They could do a CBT. I think you still only get 2 years. You've got to sort of keep redoing it. And I think they use it more of a stopgap or just out of interest rather than going onto a bigger bike. But it's this extraordinary market in 125s, which you would think the market would be absolutely swamped, wouldn't you, in 125s? But the speed at which, you know, 125s get cleaned up in the second-hand market is extraordinary. And you always wonder where do they all go? Because, you know, you look at something like the Zontes and that here, which are starting to become more mainstream. The 125 Chinese bike market has sort of tried to capture that the new rider market in certainly in Europe and the UK. It's done it much quicker in Europe than here, because when you look at the bikes which are being used for learner riders in the UK, they tend to were always things like the Yamaha YBs and the Honda CB 125s, weren't they, really? And you still see those, and the reason for that is, one, because they're incredibly reliable and long-lived. You know, they put thousands and thousands of miles on those, because generally the actual, apart from the drops, I suppose, they're easy to maintain. I'm not going to say they're cheap to buy, but they're easy to maintain, and it's that reliability, isn't it, that riding schools want to sort of catch on to. So they need those bikes to be reliable and easy to maintain, and they may do those through main dealers anyway. But quite often you see those bikes, don't you, on the second-hand market. There used to be a place down in Brighton. You'd see those bikes. You thought, oh yeah, that's an training centre bike. Relatively high mileage, but with a few, you know, war wounds on the bar ends and casings and stuff like that. You used to see those. But those bikes were, you know, with I think the way that people are buying bikes now has changed in that sector, because, you know, those Hondas and Yamahas were pretty expensive bikes. And then they're seeing bikes like these, you know, which, you know, $3,500 on the road. And this is like top spec model, the ZT, the Zonta ZT 125, which has got all the whistles and bells. You don't need that when you're training. So what's interesting, I know Billy's, who lent me this bike, Billy's in Paulborough, they do a motorcycle training. They've got a motorcycle training centre now, which is incredibly popular. You know, the thirst for people to get onto bikes it never seems to cease to amaze me sometimes. So, you know, you get that mentality of, it's the same as we used to have with cars, isn't it? You know, how many times did people buy the car that they learnt to drive in? And it's a bit like this, you know, you can use the sort of the bottom spec models of these and use them for training, because they're certainly reliable enough for that, more than reliable enough, you know, and the spec on them, and use them for your CBT, and then you might go and buy that bike and go on riding it. And that's what manufacturers did, isn't it? They would look at your bikes, and, you know, you'd look at the bike you were riding and you think, yeah, that's you become like a Ford man, a Vauxhall man, or do you know what I mean? It's that type of thing. So, you know, get people in at the beginning and you start to win an audience, isn't it? And it's very interesting. But the way that 125s are sort of used in the UK, I think it's very interesting that the turnover rate, I'd love to know, the average owner number of say a 5-year-old 125 compared to a 5-year-old 650 or 1000cc bike. It might be quite interesting, wouldn't it? But you do know, that we as riders change our bikes incredibly quickly, don't we? We have a bike for a year and think, oh, I want something else now. So I want the latest model, or I want to go from sports bikes, back can't take it. I want to go into a retro classic or a touring bike or a GS, whatever it is. And we change our bikes like we change our socks, don't we? Like me, it was every 3 or 4 days. So yeah, it's interesting. The 125 market is a very interesting area, because you're also going to get a lot of 125s being used, and that's mainly going to be mopeds for the delivery market. So many people use these bikes for deliveries, and the attrition rate on those must be colossally high, mustn't it? Because those bikes just get used and abused. And I think if you got that market sewn up, and I think particularly Honda do, don't they, with their 125s, and I think you get, this is another thing that comes onto these 125s, is that you'll get so many riders are just using them as delivery bikes. Gone are the days of the maggot delivery driver, where you've got your CX500. That we don't see that so much now, do we? Because business has changed. But you'll see millions of these mopeds going around with the Deliveroo boxes on the backs and all the rest of it, because they're so versatile, they're so nippy, so quick, that you don't need a big bike like that. And the changes in rules in big urban areas, isn't it, for your your congestion charges and stuff, that it's forced people onto little bikes. I remember a few years ago in I think is it in Australia, where they had to really control that those delivery drivers, because so many of them were being killed. It was quite shocking, really. I've always said that I always think if you're gonna do delivery driving as a job, then you should be trained. I think you should have a better level of, not saying that CBT is not a good level of training, but I think you should have a more concise level of training, that you should achieve a certain level. Because the CBT, as you know, is not a test. It's just achieving a certain level of sort of competence to ride your bike on the road. And I think if you're going to do it commercially, probably going to get shot down in flames for this, but I think if you're going to do work commercially on a motor vehicle, then I think you should be trained for it. I don't think you should have L plates for doing commercial work. I think they should set a certain level of competence and ability and skill to keep you alive, when you're doing that sort of work, because the mileage that you're doing, or certainly the hours that you're doing, rather than the mileage on the road, is far higher for someone like a Deliveroo driver, isn't it? I think that's a very interesting world, and I'm surprised that the government haven't introduced some legislation around that, and that there should be a greater level of competency for driver. You should be at least to your Mod 1, Mod 2 level before you can ride commercially, if that makes sense, as a business, as a job. I don't get the allowing L plate riders to do delivery. And I know it keeps the world moving, but I think there should be a higher standard than that. And I'm not saying that the delivery drivers and all these Just Eats people are bad riders. I've not really had any experience of that. I've not seen it really. You go to places like India and you see the mopeds in Morocco whizzing through people and all the rest of it. It's what they do. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think about that? About the I know we whiz around topics on the Wednesday Bike Club. But do you think that people that commercially ride, like delivery drivers and stuff like that, on 125s and L plates, that shouldn't really be the case? That they should have a higher level of training for that. But when you going back to the 125 in general, when you look at the bikes that you can now get compared to what I had, you know, the 125s, what are the most popular 125s? It was a different era, wasn't it? People wanted the fast 125s, but boy, were they great bikes. Things like the RD 125 LCs, MT 125s, DT 125s, they were awesome little bikes, absolutely awesome. They didn't have all the ABS and all the stuff that you get now. So maybe that's a good thing, that you get this extra level of safety on a bike, but I don't think you can replace safety with buttons and electronics over just good rider skills. I think that's really important. But yeah, 125s is a funny area, isn't it? It's completely separate from the normal motorbiking world, in how we buy them, operate them, use them, sell them, move them on, and all the stuff that comes with that. But yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts. So yeah, that's just my usual sort of picking a bit of a topic today. But yeah, having the Zontes out for a bit of a test today, I thought you might find it interesting. Right, look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next episode. Ride safe. It's a nice weekend.